The morning mist rolled over the silver-tipped mountains, curling like ghostly fingers across the valleys below. In the kingdom of Eldoria, the first light of dawn touched the banners and spires of the royal palace, casting a pale glow over streets thronged with nobles, merchants, and wandering peasants. The air was thick with anticipation. For today marked the festival of choosing, the day when the Alpha King would select his bride from among the daughters of noble families. Ilara walked beside her sister, Leora, her heart a storm of unease. Leora's every step was careful, her posture perfect, her eyes shining with practiced charm. She had been trained for this moment her whole life, and every whispered lesson of etiquette, every lesson in spellcraft and poise, had prepared her to impress the king. Ilara, on the other hand, felt like a shadow at the edge of a blazing fire. She wore a gown of soft green, embroidered with simple silver threads, a color that reflected the forest she had often wandered as a child. Her hair fell loosely over her shoulders, untamed, catching the sunlight as if it had a will of its own. She knew she did not fit the mold of the polished, golden daughters who lined the palace steps. And yet, she felt a strange pulse in her veins, an invisible thread tugging her toward a destiny she could not yet name. The palace gates opened, and the procession began. The daughters of noble houses were presented one by one, their smiles radiant, their gestures rehearsed. Leora's heart fluttered with nervous excitement. She glanced at Ilara, whose calm, steady presence seemed almost otherworldly in contrast to the sisters' usual closeness. Whispers passed through the crowd like a rising wind. "The Alpha King," they murmured, "is said to choose with eyes that pierce the soul. None can resist his will. Alpha, Alpha." And then, Kalen appeared. The Alpha King moved like a shadow through sunlight, his presence commanding, silent, and impossibly powerful. Cloaked in deep midnight blue robes, he walked with long, deliberate steps, eyes glinting like dark gemstones. His hair fell in waves over a sharp jawline, and the faintest trace of silver at the temples gave him the aura of one who had lived far longer than ordinary men. Every movement he made seemed to bend the light around him, and the chatter of the crowd fell into a tense hush. Leora's chest tightened. This was the man she had dreamed of impressing, the man whose favor would secure her family's future, the one whose choice would seal her life. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and held her breath as he approached. Yet as Kalen's gaze swept over the line of potential brides, it passed lightly over the golden daughters and the polished courtiers. It passed over Leora. And then, impossibly, it stopped on Ilara. Time seemed to slow. The mist hung still in the morning air. Ilara felt a shiver crawl down her spine. Kalen's eyes were unreadable pools of shadow and flame, and as they locked onto her own, a strange heat surged in her chest. He stepped closer. The crowd held its collective breath. Every eye in the palace seemed to turn toward her. Yet all she could see was the Alpha King, the weight of his gaze pressing against her, as if he could see every thought, every fear, every secret desire she had never admitted to herself. Then he spoke, his voice low and thunderous, yet strangely intimate, as if it were meant only for her. "She is mine." A murmur erupted across the plaza. Leora's face drained of color, her lips trembling. Ilara's heart hammered in her chest, caught between disbelief and a trembling, unnameable excitement. The sisters had always been close, yet this moment, so sudden and irrevocable, tore a sharp rift between them. Leora's eyes burned with shock, hurt, and rising anger. She had been promised this honor. The choice was supposed to be hers. But the Alpha King had chosen differently. Kalen extended a hand toward Ilara. There was no invitation in his gesture. No politeness, only command, tempered by an intensity that made it impossible to refuse. Her body moved almost of its own accord. The crowd gasped again as she stepped forward, each heartbeat echoing in her ears like a drum of fate. Inside the palace, The grand hall was a cavern of cold stone and vaulted ceilings, filled with banners and chandeliers of silver and crystal. Ilara's steps echoed as she approached Kaelin, the eyes of nobles and servants alike burning into her. She could feel their judgment, their envy, their curiosity. And yet, as she neared the Alpha King, none of it mattered. All that existed was the charge of raw, unyielding power radiating from him, and the strange, unspoken connection that thrummed between them. Kaelin studied her, and for a moment, Ilara felt as if the world itself had narrowed to the space between their gazes. He was a king, a warrior, and something older, darker, and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She sensed the weight of his destiny, the shadow of battles fought and lost, the cold bite of curses that had lingered for generations. And in that moment, she understood. She was not just chosen, she was tested. Leora's voice broke through the tension, sharp and trembling. "This is impossible. The tradition, my family." Kaelin's head turned slightly toward her, eyes narrowing like a storm breaking on jagged cliffs. "Tradition does not command the heart, child," he said. His tone was neither cruel nor kind, but final, leaving no room for argument. The court erupted into whispers, some admiring, some scandalized. The nobles could hardly believe what had just transpired. The Alpha King, so feared and admired, had ignored the expected candidates and chosen the one no one had seen as worthy. And yet, Ilara felt no pride, no triumph, only a tremor of fear mingled with a strange, thrilling curiosity. As Kaelin extended his arm, a strange vibration ran through the air. The palace seemed to hum, the banners fluttering, though there was no wind. Shadows deepened in corners where no sun touched, as if the very walls acknowledged that destiny had shifted. Ilara stepped forward, placing her hand lightly in his. The moment their skin met, a pulse of warmth surged through her. She felt the unspoken weight of his expectation, the unyielding demand of a king who had chosen her not for her beauty, not for her status, but for something far deeper. The festival ended in chaos. Nobles whispered of betrayal, of scandal, of a choice that would reshape alliances and power. Leora's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line of fury and despair. Yet even as she glared, Ilara could not help but feel a curious resolve settle into her bones. She had been chosen, and somehow, she knew her life would never be ordinary again. As the crowd dispersed, Kaelin led her through shadowed halls, the air thick with ancient magic. He did not speak, but Ilara felt the weight of his gaze upon her. It was not merely desire or curiosity, it was judgment, testing, and a silent promise that their lives were now entwined in ways neither could yet understand. In the quiet of the palace, Ilara finally dared to meet Kaelin's eyes again. The intensity in them was frightening, almost unbearable. And yet, within that storm of shadow and fire, there was a spark of something she could not name, something that whispered of trust, of danger, and of a bond that would not easily break. She swallowed hard, her heart racing. "Why me?" she whispered, though Kaelin's expression offered no answer. He simply walked beside her, the echo of his steps like a drum of fate through the empty hall. And in that silence, Ilara understood that her life, her family, and her very soul were now caught in a tide far greater than herself. The mist outside the palace thickened as night began to fall, and the first stars pricked the sky like distant flames. Somewhere in the shadows, magic stirred, and deep in her heart, Ilara felt the strange thrill of fear and something like hope. Because she was chosen. Because the Alpha King had said, "She is mine." And because nothing would ever be the same again. The halls of the Alpha King's palace were unlike any place Ilara had ever seen. Towering stone columns stretched toward the vaulted ceiling, carved with symbols that glimmered faintly in the pale torchlight. Shadows clung to the corners like living things, curling and twisting as if the walls themselves were aware of every secret, every whispered thought. A cold, Almost tangible magic lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of wax and incense. Elara followed Kaelin in silence, her pulse a steady drum in her ears. Despite the chill, there was an intensity radiating from him that made the air feel thick and warm in the same instant. Every step he took echoed with power, yet there was a grace in his movement that hinted at centuries of experience, at battles fought and victories claimed. The servants and courtiers they passed bowed quickly, murmuring words of respect or awe. Some dared to glance at Elara, and in their eyes, she could see curiosity, disbelief, and envy all at once. They expected fear, subservience, perhaps even flattery. But Elara felt none of these, only a strange mixture of caution, fascination, and the quietest ember of defiance. Kaelin finally stopped before a set of tall double doors, etched with silver in intricate patterns of twisting vines and winged beasts. Without a word, he opened them and stepped inside, and Elara followed. The chamber was vast, dimly lit by glowing crystals that floated near the ceiling, casting a soft, otherworldly light across tapestries of deep crimson and black. The air thrummed with quiet energy, as if the room itself were alive, waiting to judge or challenge those who entered. Kaelin turned to her, his eyes dark pools of shadow and fire. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a chair carved from blackened oak, inlaid with silver runes. "We have much to discuss." Elara did as she was told, though she kept her back straight and her gaze steady. She had never felt so exposed and yet so strangely safe, as if the walls themselves shielded her from the world outside. Kaelin circled her slowly, his presence almost tangible, a weight pressing against her like the pull of a storm. "Do you understand why you are here?" he asked, his voice low, carrying a quiet menace underlined by curiosity. Elara swallowed, steadying her voice. I think so, Your Majesty. You chose me during the festival." He paused, his dark gaze lingering on her face, studying, probing. "A choice is rarely made in simple words. I did not choose because I am compelled by appearances, or by duty, or by tradition. I chose you because you are unafraid of what others cannot see." Elara's heart thudded in her chest. She did not know whether to feel pride or fear. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Kaelin's lips curved slightly. Not a smile, but the faintest hint of something human beneath the kingly facade. "The court sees you as ordinary. Your sister. She is polished, trained, ready to perform her role perfectly. But you are alive. You move through the world with a truth they cannot command. That is why I chose you." Elara's mind raced. She had spent her life in the shadow of her sister's perfection, always measured, always compared. Now, the Alpha King feared, untouchable was saying that she was the one he had seen. She could not deny the pulse of exhilaration that ran through her, though it was tangled with a thread of fear she could not name. Kaelin turned sharply, walking toward a high window that overlooked the misty mountains. The moonlight cast a silver glow over his figure, sharp and commanding. "Do you know what it means to be chosen by an Alpha King?" he asked, his voice lower now, almost a whisper, meant only for her. Elara hesitated. I think it means honor, duty, that I am to stand beside you." He laughed softly, a sound that echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. "It means all that, and more. It means facing dangers no one else will ever understand. It means standing in the shadows and confronting truths that could break lesser hearts. It means becoming part of me and part of something older. Older than the crown. Older than the kingdom itself." End quote. Elara felt a chill run through her. The weight of his words pressed on her chest, a reminder that she had stepped into a world far larger, far darker than she had imagined. And yet, beneath the fear, A spark of determination ignited. She would not falter. Not now. Not ever. If she could help it. "Then I will stand," she said, her voice firm, though it trembled slightly. Kaelin's gaze softened for the briefest moment, and then hardened again. "Good. But understand, this standing with me is not a choice for comfort. It is a choice that will test your heart, your spirit, and your will. The court, the kingdom, even your own family, may turn against you. And yet," his hand brushed the air, as if tracing an invisible line between them, "you are still here. That is enough for now." Elara nodded, sensing the gravity behind his words. She could feel the invisible thread of their connection strengthening, like a bond she could neither name nor resist. In the days that followed, Kaelin tested her in small ways. He led her through the palace's shadowed corridors, pointing out secret passages, hidden wards, and enchanted mirrors that revealed not one's reflection, but one's true intentions. He asked her to perform simple tasks that seemed harmless on the surface, but carried subtle challenges. A puzzle that required intuition and insight. A charm that could only be broken by courage. Each test drew them closer, though neither admitted it. There was a tension that ran through their interactions, a quiet electricity that made the air between them almost unbearable at times. Elara found herself watching him as he moved through the halls, noting the strength in his shoulders, the careful deliberation in his movements, and the way his eyes seemed to pierce through every disguise and pretense. Meanwhile, Leora seethed in the shadows of the court. Her beauty, her training, her calculated charm, all of it had been for naught. She whispered to allies, hinted at scandal, and plotted subtle ways to regain the Alpha King's attention. Every time Elara appeared in the public chambers with Kaelin, Leora's gaze followed, sharp and filled with quiet fury. One evening, Elara discovered a library tucked deep within the palace, its walls lined with ancient tomes and scrolls. She wandered among them, brushing her fingers over the spines, feeling the weight of centuries of knowledge and power. Kaelin appeared behind her without a sound, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves. "You are drawn to it," he observed. "The stories, the histories, the secrets. Most would fear these pages." "I don't fear them," Elara admitted. "I want to understand. If I am to stand with you, I must know what I am stepping into." Kaelin nodded, approvingly, but with a shadow passing over his expression. "Knowledge can protect you, but it can also trap you. Be careful what you seek." Days turned into nights, and nights into days. Elara learned the rhythms of the castle, the unspoken rules of the court, and the depths of Kaelin's power. She discovered the truth of the curse that bound him, an ancient magic that had trapped his heart in shadow, demanding loyalty and strength from anyone who would stand beside him. It was a dangerous game, one that could consume both their hearts if they faltered. Yet, even as the danger grew, so did the bond between them. There were moments, brief and fleeting, when Kaelin allowed a softness, a glimpse of the man beneath the king, beneath the alpha. A brush of a hand, a faint smile, a whispered word in the quiet of the night, all of it left Elara's heart, both fearful and yearning. But the threat of her sister's envy remained. Leora would not relent. She watched, plotted, and waited for the moment to strike, to reclaim what she believed was hers by right. And as Elara's connection to Kaelin deepened, she realized that the real challenge had only begun. Not the trials of magic or court intrigue, but the trials of loyalty, courage, and heart. That night, as the moon rose silver and full over the palace, Elara stood at a high balcony, overlooking the mist-shrouded forests below. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying whispers of the past and shadows of the future. Kaelin stepped beside her silently, his presence a dark weight and a strange comfort at once. "Elara," he said, his voice low, "the court will try to sway you. Your sister will try to break you. and the curse will test you at every step. But if you survive this, we may endure anything together." She met his gaze, feeling the gravity of his words settle like stone in her chest. Kaelin's eyes softened slightly, and he nodded. "Good. Because the shadow is coming, and it will not wait for either of us to be ready." Ilara's stomach tightened. She knew, in that moment, that her life had changed forever. The choice had been made, the path set. And beyond the walls of the palace, in the silent forests and hidden corners of Eldoria, danger and destiny stirred in equal measure. The wind howled through the balcony, carrying a chill and a promise alike. The road ahead would test her, push her to her limits, and demand courage she had never known. And yet, in the strange, terrifying pull of the Alpha King beside her, she sensed that she was no longer alone in facing it. The moon hung high above Eldoria, silver and cold, casting its light over the castle and the forest beyond. Shadows pooled in the corners of the grand halls and climbed the walls like silent fingers. In this quiet hour, the palace seemed alive, whispering secrets only the chosen could hear. Ilara walked beside Kaelin, her steps cautious, her heart thrumming in a rhythm that matched his own. Tonight, she would face a trial unlike any before, a ritual meant to bind them in ways words could never capture. The chamber they entered was vast and circular, with a floor of black marble that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. At its center, an intricate pattern was etched in silver, glowing with a soft, otherworldly light. Strange glyphs floated in the air, circling slowly, as if they had a life of their own. Candles flickered along the walls, their flames bending toward the center as though drawn by an unseen force. "This is the Hall of Shadows," Kaelin said, his voice low and steady. "Few survive the ritual. Fewer still do so unchanged. But if we succeed, our bond will be stronger than any curse or blade in Eldoria." Ilara swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a storm cloud. She had known that being chosen by the Alpha King would be dangerous. But this was a step into a world where the line between life and shadow blurred. Kaelin extended his hand toward her. "Are you ready?" Ilara's fingers brushed against his, and a shiver ran through her. The moment their hands touched, the room shifted. The silver glyphs on the floor pulsed, and the floating symbols spun faster, casting dancing lights across the walls. Shadows stretched and bent, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. Ilara felt her chest tighten. Fear and exhilaration intertwined, forming a strange energy she had never known. Kaelin's eyes met hers. "Focus on me. Trust me. If your heart wavers, the shadows will consume what you fear most." Ilara took a deep breath, letting his presence anchor her. She felt the pulse of power between them, a magnetic pull that neither could deny. Slowly, deliberately, they stepped into the silver circle, the air around them shimmering with tension. The ritual began. Shadows rose from the floor, forming into swirling figures that mirrored their fears and desires. Ilara faced visions of loss, her family torn apart, the palace consumed by darkness, Kaelin himself succumbing to the ancient curse that had bound him for centuries. The illusions were vivid, almost real, and for a moment, her legs wavered. Kaelin's voice cut through the darkness, steady and commanding. "Do not falter. Face them, Ilara. These shadows are not your enemies, they are your truths." She clenched her fists and forced herself to look at the figures, one by one. Each shadow reflected a part of her own heart. Doubt, grief, longing, courage. With each acknowledgement, the shadow dissolved, melting into the silver light of the circle. Kaelin moved beside her, his own shadowed fears manifesting in twisted, monstrous shapes. Ilara caught glimpses of them, visions of betrayal, of loss, of a time when even the Alpha King had been powerless. She reached for his hand, and the touch anchored him as much as it anchored her. Together, they moved through the circle, stepping carefully, confronting each illusion, facing the truth of their hearts. But the ritual was not complete. From the edges of the chamber, another presence emerged. Leora had found her way inside, cloaked in a shadow that twisted unnaturally, fueled by jealousy and ambition. Her eyes gleamed with fury as she whispered incantations she had learned in secret, attempting to disrupt the bond forming between Elara and Kaelin. Elara's stomach tightened. She realized that Leora's envy was a danger more immediate than any shadow the ritual had conjured. The air thickened, and the floating glyphs shivered violently. Kaelin's jaw tightened, and his shadow surged forward, a dark, protective wall that sought to shield Elara. "You will not touch her," Kaelin growled, his voice like rolling thunder. The shadows around him twisted into sharp shapes, striking at Leora's intrusion. But Leora was clever and desperate. She evaded the first waves of shadow, her eyes fixed on Elara. "He should have chosen me," she cried. "This is mine by right." Elara's heart ached at her sister's words. For a fleeting moment, she remembered the laughter and shared secrets of their childhood, the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. And yet, that bond had been overshadowed by envy and ambition. She clenched her jaw and faced Leora. "You have no right," Elara said, her voice steady. "This path was never meant for you. It is mine to walk, and I will not falter." With those words, the silver circle flared, a brilliant light washing over the chamber. Leora screamed, stumbling back, her dark energy faltering against the bond between Elara and Kaelin. Shadows twisted and coiled, and in the brilliance, the bond between the Chosen and the Alpha King solidified. When the light faded, the chamber was still. Leora was gone, leaving only the echo of her anger behind. Elara and Kaelin stood in the center, breathing heavily, their hands still clasped. They were both changed, stronger, bound, and acutely aware of the depth of the connection forming between them. Kaelin's eyes softened, and for a moment, the shadowed mask of the Alpha King fell away, revealing a vulnerability that few had ever seen. "You were remarkable," he said quietly. "You faced the shadows and did not break. That is more than many could do." Elara's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. "I did not do it alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You were with me." Kaelin's gaze lingered on her, and in that look, Elara felt the unspoken weight of his admiration, respect, and something deeper, an emotion that trembled on the edge of fear and desire. The night stretched on as they walked through the palace halls in silence. Every corner seemed alive, every shadow a reminder of the trials they had faced. The bond between them hummed softly, a tether stronger than any magic in Eldoria. Elara felt it in her pulse, in the warmth of his hand, in the quiet strength that radiated from him. Yet, even in the calm, danger lingered. Leora's betrayal had not ended. It had only been delayed. Somewhere in the palace, she plotted, her envy growing sharper with every passing moment. And beyond the walls, the shadows of Eldoria stirred, aware of the bond that had been formed in defiance of darkness. Elara finally stopped at a balcony that overlooked the forests, their dark outlines stretching into the horizon. The moonlight bathed Kaelin in silver, highlighting the sharp lines of his face and the shadows beneath his eyes. He leaned on the stone railing, his expression unreadable, yet filled with the weight of what they had endured. "You are different from any I have ever known," he said quietly, as if speaking to the wind rather than to her. "Most would have faltered, most would have turned away. But you are made of fire and shadow, courage and truth. And yet, I see fear in you as well." Elara met his gaze, feeling the tension between them like a living thing. "I am afraid," she admitted, But I will not let it control me. Hmm. Kalen's eyes softened, a rare warmth breaking through the darkness. That is why I chose you. Not because you are perfect, not because you are safe, but because you are strong enough to face the storm, even when the storm is me. A silence fell between them, heavy and full of unspoken words. The wind whispered through the balcony, carrying the scent of pine and the distant murmur of the forest. For the first time, Elara felt the depth of what it meant to be bound to the Alpha King, not just by destiny, but by courage, trust, and something that neither shadow nor curse could easily sever. And yet, even as she felt that bond strengthen, the thought of her sister's envy gnawed at her. Leora had not disappeared. She had only retreated, and her schemes were far from over. Elara knew that the trials ahead would test more than her courage. They would test her heart, her loyalty, and her understanding of the bond forming between her and Kalen. Kalen turned toward her, his dark gaze steady and commanding. "Rest now, Elara," he said softly. "The shadows have been faced, but the journey is far from over. The bond is formed, but it must be tempered. Tomorrow, the court will watch, and the whispers will begin. And your sister, she will not yield." Elara nodded, her body weary but her spirit ignited. "I will be ready," she said, the resolve in her voice steady and true. Kalen's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. And for a moment, the Alpha King seemed almost human, almost vulnerable, almost capable of hope. "Good," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Because the shadow is never gone, and neither is the choice you made. Stand strong, Elara, for the path ahead will demand all that you are and more." The wind carried those words into the night, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Beyond the walls, the forests were dark and alive with unseen power. Leora plotted in silence, and somewhere deep in Eldoria, the ancient magic that had bound Kalen stirred, sensing the bond that had been forged in fire and shadow. Elara stood at the balcony, hand in hand with Kalen, feeling the strange pull of destiny, the weight of courage, and the first stirrings of something far more profound: trust, longing, and the promise of a bond that neither shadow nor sisterly envy could break easily. Dawn broke over Eldoria like molten silver spilling across the mountains. The mist clung stubbornly to the valleys, hiding the forests in a soft haze. In the palace, the morning was not calm, it was alive with tension. Rumors had spread through the court like wildfire, whispers of the Alpha King's unusual choice and the shadowed trials that had bound him to Elara. Courtiers exchanged uncertain glances, some envious, some fearful, and a few who quietly feared what the bond might mean for the kingdom itself. Elara walked beside Kalen through the grand corridors, her hand brushing against his. The trials of the night had left both of them exhausted. Yet there was a quiet strength in their shared steps. She had faced shadows, confronted her fears, and survived the darkness that sought to break her. And in doing so, she had discovered something she had not expected: courage, that came not just from herself, but from the bond with the Alpha King. Kalen's presence was steady and commanding. Yet beneath the shadowed mask, Elara sensed a rare softness. His eyes, dark and intense, occasionally softened when they met hers. That was the only time she felt a hint of the man beneath the Alpha King. A man capable of trust, care, and perhaps even hope. Yet, as they moved through the palace, the shadow of Leora's envy lingered. The princess had not given up. She had only retreated, plotting quietly in the hidden corners of the court. Elara knew that sooner or later, her sister's schemes would resurface. The first challenge came unexpectedly. A messenger arrived from the northern provinces, bearing news of unrest. The villagers had reported strange shadows moving through the forests at night, attacking travelers and livestock. It was as if the darkness that had been stirred in the palace had seeped into the world beyond. Kalen's expression darkened. "The shadows sense the bond," he said quietly. "They are drawn to strength, to connection, and they will not stop until they test it or destroy it." Elara felt a shiver of fear, but she did not let it show. "Then, we face them together," she said, her voice steady. "We have survived the ritual. We can survive this." Kalen's jaw tightened, and he nodded, a faint trace of admiration in his eyes. They traveled to the northern forests, where the mist was thick and the trees towered like ancient sentinels. Shadows danced between the trunks, flickering in ways that defied light. Elara's hand tightened on the hilt of her sword, a weapon Kalen had entrusted to her. She had trained with it, honed her reflexes, and learned to trust not just her skill, but the instincts that had guided her through the Hall of Shadows. The first attack came without warning. Twisting, dark shapes surged from the trees, their forms fluid and terrifying, with eyes like molten coal, and mouths that whispered fear. Elara felt her heart hammer, but Kalen's hand found hers, grounding her. The bond between them flared, and a surge of power ran through her veins. "Focus on the light," Kalen commanded, his voice low and strong. "The shadows cannot withstand truth and courage." Elara raised her sword, the silver blade catching the moonlight that still lingered faintly above the mist. She struck with precision, her movements flowing in rhythm with Kalen's own strikes. Together, they fought as one, their bond forming a shield against the encroaching darkness. Hours passed, and the forest seemed endless. Each wave of shadow tested them. Visions of failure, fear, and despair. Yet, with every strike, every shared glance, and every whispered word of encouragement, they held their ground. Elara felt her courage grow, tempered by trust, and fueled by the strange, unspoken connection with the Alpha King. Finally, as the first light of true dawn broke through the mist, the shadows recoiled, hissing and dissolving into the air. The forest fell silent, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the pounding of their hearts. Elara sank to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. Kalen knelt beside her, his hand brushing her hair from her face. "You have done more than survive," he said softly. "You have proven yourself. And the bond we share is now stronger than any curse or shadow in Eldoria." Elara looked up at him, the weight of their shared trials settling in her chest. "We did this together," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't have done it alone." Kalen's gaze lingered on her, filled with an intensity that made her chest ache. "You are stronger than you know," he whispered. "Stronger than I dared to hope." Their moment of quiet triumph, however, was not meant to last. News reached them that Leora had acted. She had stirred unrest in the court, spreading lies about Elara and Kalen, attempting to turn nobles and allies against them. The court was tense, divided, and the kingdom teetered on the edge of chaos. Elara's heart ached at the thought of her sister's betrayal, but she did not falter. She knew that the only way to protect the kingdom and their bond was to confront Leora openly. Together, they returned to the palace, stepping into the storm of intrigue that awaited. In the grand hall, Leora stood at the center, her face pale but resolute. Nobles whispered behind her, some casting curious glances toward Elara and Kalen. The air was thick with tension, and every eye was fixed on the sisters and the Alpha King. Leora's voice rang out, sharp and accusing. "You chose her, Alpha King. You claimed her as yours, ignoring the tradition and the rightful place of your people. This cannot stand." Elara stepped forward, her sword sheathed, her hand held lightly in Kalen's. "The bond was never about tradition or right," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the hall. "It was about truth, courage, and choice. Kalen chose me because he saw what others could not, and I will not step aside because of envy or fear." The court murmured, some in shock, some in admiration. Leora's face twisted in fury, but she was silent, caught in the power of the bond that had been forged through shadow and fire. Kalen's voice cut through the tension, commanding and absolute. This ends now. The bond is true, and it will not be broken by whispers or jealousy. Elara is chosen, and she stands with me. Any who oppose this are not just opposing her, they are opposing Eldoria itself. The nobles fell silent, the weight of his authority pressing down on them. Even Leora faltered under the gaze of her brother-in-law, the Alpha King, and the strength of the bond she could not touch. For the first time, Elara saw her sister truly falter. There was sorrow in Leora's eyes, the first crack in her armor of envy. She had believed power and tradition would define her, but she had underestimated courage, trust, and the bond forged in shadow and fire. Elara approached her slowly, her hand extended. "It is not too late," she said softly. "You can choose a different path, one not defined by anger or envy, one that allows you to find your own strength." Leora looked at her, trembling, and for a long moment, the hall was silent. Then, slowly, she lowered her gaze, the first sign of acceptance and humility touching her heart. She did not speak, but her shoulders relaxed, and the tension ebbed. Kalen stepped beside Elara, his hand brushing hers. "The shadows have tested us all," he said. "And today, the bond has endured. Not because it was easy, but because it was true." The court watched as the sisters stood in the hall, bound not just by blood but by the trials that had tested them all. Elara felt a strange warmth in her chest, a sense of triumph tempered by the knowledge that the path ahead would still hold challenges. But for the first time, she felt ready. Kalen's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "You are mine, Elara," he said softly, the intensity of his words carrying a weight that few could bear. Not by tradition, not by power, but by choice, courage, and truth. Together, we are stronger than any shadow, any curse, any fear. Elara nodded, her own voice steady and true. "And I am yours, not just by destiny, but by will, by heart, and by the bond we have forged." The hall seemed to exhale, the tension lifting as sunlight began to spill through the windows, illuminating the faces of the nobles and the sisters. Leora stepped back, her eyes soft with unspoken understanding. The envy and rivalry that had once defined her presence had shifted, leaving a quiet, unspoken respect for the courage her sister had shown. As the kingdom of Eldoria breathed a collective sigh of relief, Elara and Kalen stood together, their bond unbroken, their hearts aligned, and the shadows that had once threatened to consume them now defeated. And in the quiet of the palace, amidst the whispers of history and magic, Elara felt the truth she had always known, but had never dared to speak aloud. Love, courage, and trust could conquer even the deepest shadow, and that bond, forged in fire and shadow, would endure forever.